He sat in the same corner every morning, like part of the furniture, noticed by no one. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe if you love meaningful stories, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I really enjoy seeing where these stories travel. Walter arrived at 8:03 a.m. sharp every single day. He wore a brown tweed coat, a cap that had seen better days, and always carried a folded newspaper under his arm. The cafe staff knew his order before he spoke: black coffee, no sugar, and one buttered roll. He always chose the table in the far corner near the window, the one with a crooked chair leg that wobbled if you weren't careful. But no one ever sat with him. Customers bustled in and out, chatting loudly, tapping away on laptops or scrolling their phones. The young barista behind the counter would give him a polite smile, sometimes a quick good morning, but that was it. Nobody asked his name. Nobody stayed long enough to hear him speak. And Walter? He never asked for more. He would sit quietly, sip his coffee, unfold his newspaper with hands that trembled just a little, and gaze out the window as if waiting for something, or someone, that never came. Emma had noticed him for weeks. She was new to town, working remotely, and used the cafe as a second office. Most days she'd sit near the back and plug in her laptop, half listening to the buzz of conversations. But the old man in the corner, there was something about him. The way he sat so still, the way he always looked out the window, not really reading his paper, and especially the way nobody seemed to see him. One morning, the barista handed Emma her cappuccino and said with a laugh, "That guy's here before we even unlock the door." Emma smiled politely but didn't laugh. Something about the comment felt off, dismissive. She turned to look at the man again. He was already at his table, alone. That day, Emma chose a different seat, one a little closer to him. Not directly beside him, but close enough to observe. She opened her laptop, but her eyes kept drifting back to the corner, the way he held his cup with both hands, the way he looked at every person who walked in, just for a moment, before returning to his window view. He looked like someone who used to be surrounded by people. She wondered about his story. Was he a widower? Had he retired? Did he have children who lived far away? Or worse, nearby but distant in a different way? The next day, Emma chose the same seat. And the next. Over time, she started to notice more. He always wore polished shoes. He nodded at every employee, even if they didn't look his way. And he always finished his coffee, but rarely touched his roll. Emma wasn't sure why it mattered to her, but it did. Maybe it was the way he reminded her of her grandfather, who used to sit in silence after her grandmother passed. Or maybe it was just that in a world obsessed with rushing and scrolling and getting ahead, someone like Walter felt like a reminder of something slower, something simpler, something worth noticing. Whatever the reason, that week she made a quiet decision. Tomorrow, she would sit down next to him. Not to intrude, not to pry, just to say hello, because maybe, just maybe, all he needed was someone to see him. The next morning, Walter was already there. Same coat, same seat, same quiet stillness, as Emma stepped through the door with a knot of nerves in her stomach. She ordered her usual drink, then hesitated. For a moment, she considered backing out. Maybe it was silly. Maybe he didn't want to be bothered. But then she looked over and saw him adjusting the crooked chair leg with one hand while the other held his coffee steady. And in that small, fragile motion, she saw something that gave her the courage to walk over. "Excuse me," she said gently, standing beside his table. "Mind if I sit?" Walter looked up, his eyes surprised but not unkind. They were pale blue, rimmed with tiredness, and it took him a moment to respond. Then slowly he nodded and gestured to the seat across from him. Emma sat down. Neither of them spoke at first. The cafe hummed around them, grinders buzzing, spoons clinking against mugs, faint indie music playing overhead. But at their table, it was quiet. "I see you here a lot," Emma finally said. "I usually sit over there." She gestured toward the back corner. Walter gave a small nod. "Yes, I've noticed." His voice was gravelly, but calm, like someone who hadn't used it much lately. "I'm Emma," she said, offering a small smile. "Walter." They shook hands across the table. His grip was firm, but the skin was paper thin and cold. For a moment she didn't know what to say next. She hadn't planned that far, but Walter rescued the silence. "You work here?" he asked, glancing at her laptop case. "Not exactly," she replied with a light laugh. "I work remotely. I guess I've sort of adopted this place as my office." Walter nodded. "It's a good place, not too loud. And the coffee's decent." Emma smiled. "And you? You live nearby?" "2 blocks over. Been coming here since, oh, long before it had free Wi-Fi." That made her laugh. He smiled too, barely, but it was real. The lines on his face creased upward, and for the first time, he didn't look quite so alone. "What brings you here every day?" she asked gently. He looked down into his coffee for a long moment before answering. "Habit, mostly, and I like to watch the world go by." Emma nodded. "I get that." There was a quiet understanding between them now. She didn't press for more, and he didn't offer it. But as she finished her coffee and gathered her things to leave, Walter spoke again. "It was kind of you to sit with me." Emma paused, caught off guard by how much that simple sentence meant. "I'm glad I did." And she meant it. Something in her chest felt different, lighter, like she'd taken a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She stood up and looked at him once more. "Maybe I'll see you tomorrow." Walter nodded, but this time his voice was a little warmer. "I'd like that." The next day, Emma arrived a few minutes earlier than usual. She wasn't sure why, maybe curiosity, maybe concern, but as she pushed open the cafe door and saw Walter already in his seat, something like relief settled over her. She ordered her cappuccino, then walked straight over. "Good morning," she said, sliding into the seat across from him without waiting this time. Walter smiled, a little more quickly than the day before. "Morning, Emma." There was a quiet comfort in the way he said her name. Familiar now, not foreign. For a while they talked about simple things, the weather turning colder, the construction near the park, how the cafe's music was always slightly too loud for his liking. Then Emma asked, "Did you always live here in this town?" Walter nodded. "Born and raised. Haven't left much except for a few years in the army. Met my wife here, built my life here." "Built?" she echoed. "I was a carpenter," he said, eyes drifting out the window. "Worked on homes mostly. I liked building things people could live in. Made me feel useful." There was pride in his voice, but also something else. Something faded. "Are you retired now?" Walter chuckled, but it was quiet. "I suppose you could say that. No one's hired me in years. My tools are all rusting in the shed." Emma smiled softly. "Still sounds like you had a meaningful career." Walter gave a half shrug. "It was a good life. Busy, honest." He fell silent, stirring his coffee, even though there was nothing in it. Emma hesitated, then asked, "Do you have family?" It was a simple question, but Walter's expression changed. He set the spoon down gently and looked at her. "I had a daughter," he said. "Still do, I guess, though we haven't spoken in a long time." Emma felt a flicker of guilt. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to—" "It's all right," Walter said, waving it off. "You asked a fair question." He looked down at the table, his hands folded, knuckles spotted with age. "We argued. Years ago. I said things I shouldn't have. She left town, and we just never patched things up. She sent a card when her mother died, but we haven't spoken since." Emma's heart sank. "How long ago was that?" she asked gently. Walter exhaled. "Almost 15 years." She couldn't imagine that kind of silence, that kind of distance between two people who once shared a home, a life, a history. "Do you know where she is now?" Walter shook his head. "No idea. Moved away. Changed her name, I think. I suppose I could have tried harder, but after a while, it felt too late. I didn't think she wanted to hear from me." There was no anger in his voice, just weariness, regret woven into every word. Emma wanted to say something comforting, something wise, but nothing felt right. So, instead, she reached across the table and placed her hand gently on his. Walter looked at her, surprised. Then his eyes softened. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. He nodded, voice low. "Me too." They sat like that for a while, the noise of the cafe swirling around them. But at their little table in the corner, time moved a little slower. And for the first time in what felt like years, Walter wasn't remembering his life alone. The following week, their corner of the cafe had become something unspoken, a shared space, claimed not by ownership, but by quiet routine. Walter always arrived first. Emma followed a few minutes later, often bringing him something small. A cinnamon muffin he liked, a newspaper she thought he'd enjoy, or once a pair of warm gloves after noticing his fingers trembling in the cold. Each morning they talked a little more. Walter spoke about his wife, Mary Ann, with such reverence that Emma felt as if she'd known her. He described her laugh, her stubborn streak, the way she sang while cooking. He even chuckled softly as he recalled how she once repainted the entire kitchen while he was away on a work trip, just because she'd grown tired of boring beige. "She made everything brighter," Walter said one morning, stirring his coffee. "Then she left, and the house felt dim. Still does, really." Emma listened closely. She never interrupted. But as the days passed, one topic lingered like a shadow: his daughter. Walter never said her name, and Emma, unsure if it would reopen wounds too deep, hadn't pressed him. Still, the silence around that subject felt louder each day. One afternoon, as the cafe emptied out earlier than usual, Walter seemed quieter than normal. He gazed out the window, his coffee untouched. Emma waited, sensing something. "She used to sit right there," he said suddenly, pointing to a small table near the door. "Our daughter, every Saturday morning, her and Mary Ann. She'd bring her coloring books, drink hot chocolate with extra whipped cream." Emma followed his gaze. The table was now occupied by 2 college students with earbuds and laptops. It felt wrong, somehow. "I taught her how to ride a bike," Walter said. "She fell a lot, skinned her knees more times than I can count, but she always got back up. She had spirit." Emma leaned in slightly. "What was her name?" Walter hesitated, then answered so softly she almost didn't hear it. "Lena." It was the first time he had said it aloud. Emma let the name settle between them. "She sounds like she was a beautiful soul." "She was," Walter said. "Still is, I hope." Emma chose her words carefully. "You never thought about reaching out?" Walter gave a tired smile. "I've thought about it every day, but thinking isn't the same as doing, is it?" He paused. "She made it clear back then that she needed space. I gave it to her. And then, the years just slipped by. You start to believe you've waited too long, that your voice wouldn't be welcome." Emma felt something ache inside her. She couldn't imagine 15 years of silence, and from the way Walter spoke, she could tell it wasn't pride holding him back. It was fear. "Maybe it's not too late," she said softly. Walter looked at her, eyes weary. "Hope is hard when you've disappointed someone you love." Emma hesitated, then asked, "Do you know her last name now?" or where she moved. He shook his head. Not anymore. She stopped sending Christmas cards after the first couple of years. Emma nodded, but her mind was already turning. She wasn't trying to play detective, but something inside her wanted to try, not for the sake of curiosity, but because she'd come to care, and because Walter deserved a second chance, if it still existed. That night, back at her apartment, she opened her laptop and typed in, Lena Millert, New York. It was a long shot, a whisper in the dark, but sometimes whispers carry farther than we expect. Emma wasn't sure what she was hoping for when she typed Lena's name into the search bar. Maybe a public social media profile. Maybe a photo that resembled Walter. Or maybe, if she was being honest, some kind of sign that the past wasn't completely out of reach. The first few results were dead ends, old class rosters, a wedding announcement from someone with the same name but clearly not the same woman, and a LinkedIn profile for a software developer in Oregon. Emma sighed, rubbed her eyes, and scrolled on. Then she saw it. A short blog post on a community nonprofit site written by a woman named Lena Green. The last name was different, but the author's bio mentioned something that caught her attention. Originally from upstate New York, Lena now lives in Brooklyn with her husband and daughter. Emma clicked. There was a small photo at the bottom of the post, a woman in her late 30s smiling beside a young girl. The woman had light eyes and a quiet strength in her face, something that reminded Emma of Walter. She stared at it for a long time. Could this really be her? Emma didn't act right away. She closed her laptop and paced her apartment for a while, torn between hope and hesitation. What if it was her, and she didn't want to be found? What if Walter was right, and the silence had hardened into something permanent? But the next morning, when she walked into the cafe and saw Walter sitting alone, sipping his coffee with that same distant gaze, her doubts quieted. He had never asked her to find his daughter. He probably never would. But Emma believed some silences needed to be broken. Gently, carefully, but broken all the same. That evening, she returned to the site and found the contact email at the bottom of the page. Just a general inbox, but it was something. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then, slowly, she began to type. Hello, my name is Emma. I'm writing because I believe I've recently become friends with someone important to you. His name is Walter, and he speaks about you often, with a kind of quiet love I haven't seen in a long time. He doesn't know I'm writing this, and I understand if this message is unexpected or even unwanted. But if by some chance you are his daughter Lena, and if there's even a part of you that wonders how he is, he's here. He misses you, and I think he's still hoping. Warmly, Emma. She reread the message a dozen times before finally pressing send. Then she closed her laptop and sat very still. In the quiet that followed, she felt her heart beating faster. There were no guarantees, no way to know if it would ever be read, let alone welcomed. But she had done something Walter hadn't been able to do in 15 years. She had opened the door. Now, all they could do was wait. The days that followed moved slowly. Emma returned to the cafe each morning, as usual, and found Walter waiting at their table. He seemed content to see her, always greeting her with a quiet smile, but Emma could feel something stirring beneath the surface, an invisible thread of longing he carried with every sip of coffee. She didn't tell him about the message, not yet. It wasn't her place, not unless something came of it. She didn't want to give him hope that might lead to nothing, but each time she checked her email and saw nothing new, a strange pressure settled in her chest. A mix of guilt, worry, and doubt. What if she'd crossed a line? What if Lena read the message and deleted it without a second thought? Or worse, what if it had never even reached her? Walter, meanwhile, kept talking in soft fragments about the past. He told her about the time he built Lena a dollhouse by hand for her 7th birthday, spending weeks carving tiny furniture pieces in the shed at night. She called it her castle, he said, his eyes gleaming with memory. Said no store-bought one could ever be as good. Emma smiled at the story, but her heart ached with the weight of what he didn't know. She wished she could promise him something, reunion, forgiveness, closure, but she couldn't. Then, on the 5th morning, just as Emma was about to pack up her laptop, she glanced at her phone. One new email. Her breath caught as she saw the subject line. Your message about Walter. Hands trembling, she opened it. Dear Emma, I don't really know what to say. I wasn't sure I should respond at all. I've spent the last 15 years trying to move forward. My father and we left things badly. It wasn't just one moment. It was years of feeling unseen, unheard, and eventually unwanted. But I never stopped wondering if he ever thought of me. I've carried that question quietly, buried it most days. Reading your message shook something loose. Is he really still in the same town? Still going to that cafe? I don't know what I want or what I'm ready for, but I think I'd like to see him, even just once. Lena. Emma stared at the screen, rereading every word. Her heart felt like it might break under the sheer emotion of it all. She looked up and saw Walter sipping his coffee across from her, unaware of the storm quietly building behind her eyes. He didn't know it yet, but something was about to shift. Slowly, Emma lowered her phone and cleared her throat. Walter? He looked up, raising his eyebrows slightly. I have something to tell you, she said, her voice steadying as she met his gaze. And just like that, the silence between past and present began to crack open. Walter stared at Emma as the words settled into the air between them. For a few seconds he didn't speak, his hands wrapped tightly around his coffee cup, unmoving. She wrote back? He asked, barely above a whisper. Emma nodded. Yesterday evening, I didn't want to say anything until I was sure. Walter leaned back in his chair slowly, eyes fixed on the table. His lips moved, but no sound came out at first. Then finally, what did she say? Emma hesitated, unsure how much to share. She said she's been carrying a lot of pain, but also that she never stopped wondering if you thought about her. Walter closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, they glistened. I think she wants to see you, Emma continued gently. She said, even just once. Walter let out a shaky breath and nodded, but instead of joy, his face seemed filled with something more complicated. Doubt, fear, something deeper than either. I don't know what to say to her, he admitted. You don't have to prepare a speech, Emma said softly. Just show up. Be honest. That's what matters most. He looked at her with a mixture of gratitude and quiet panic. What if she's just coming to say goodbye? Emma shook her head. Then at least she'll know you were waiting, that you never stopped caring. The days that followed were filled with a kind of restless quiet. Walter kept coming to the cafe, but he spoke less. Sometimes he would open his mouth to say something, then stop and look away. Emma didn't push. She stayed beside him, offering her presence more than her words. One morning as she arrived, she found him holding a small wooden box. I made this for her years ago, he said. It was supposed to be a wedding gift, but I never sent it. He opened the box gently, revealing a delicate wooden frame, hand-carved with patterns of ivy and leaves encircling a faded photograph. Walter, Marianne, and a young Lena, maybe 9 or 10, beaming with her arms around both parents. Emma felt her chest tighten. She looks so much like you, she said quietly. Walter nodded. I don't know if she'll even want it, but I wanted to bring it, just in case. They waited 3 more days before the next message arrived. It was short, simple. I'll be there Friday morning. Same cafe. 9 o'clock. Walter showed Emma the message like it was a precious relic. His hands trembled as he passed her the phone. Friday, 9 o'clock. It was only 2 days away, but to Walter it felt like holding his breath underwater. That night, he didn't sleep, and the next night he barely touched his dinner. He pressed his shirt, polished his shoes, and sat in silence with the box on the kitchen table. On Thursday, he brought Emma a flower, a daisy from his small garden. For luck, he said with a nervous smile, and for sitting down that day. Emma took it with both hands and smiled. She's coming because of you, Walter. I just helped open a door. He looked out the cafe window for a long time after that. Friday was almost here, and with it, the answer to a question that had lived in his heart for 15 years. Friday morning came with a quiet kind of tension, the kind that hangs in the air before a storm. Not destructive, but powerful. Walter arrived at 8:15, earlier than usual. His clothes were neatly pressed, his hair combed carefully back, and in his hands he held the wooden box as though it were made of glass. Emma was already there. She'd arrived even earlier. Not wanting him to wait alone, she greeted him with a warm smile and a soft, "Good morning," but they both knew this day wasn't like the others. They chose a larger table near the window, not their usual corner, but one with an open chair beside Walter. He kept glancing at the door, checking his watch, holding his breath between each second. "She'll come," Emma whispered, sensing his doubt. Walter nodded, but didn't speak. The minutes ticked past. 8:48, 8:53, 8:59. And then, at exactly 9:01, the cafe door opened. Walter turned, slow and unsure. A woman stepped inside, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She wore a navy blue coat, and her dark hair was tucked behind her ears. Her eyes scanned the room until they landed on Walter, and stopped. She didn't smile, but she didn't look away either. Walter stood up. "Lena," he said softly, voice already cracking. The woman took one step forward, then another. For a long moment, neither moved beyond that. They just looked at each other, father and daughter, older now, changed by time, by silence, by all the words never said. Emma rose quietly and gave Walter a small nod. Then she slipped away to the far side of the cafe, giving them space, but staying close, just in case. "I didn't know if you'd really come," Walter said after a long pause. "I didn't know if I should," Lena replied. Walter nodded. "That's fair." More silence, not heavy now, but cautious. "I kept this," Walter said, holding out the box. "I made it for you, years ago. I didn't send it. I didn't think I had the right." Lena hesitated, then reached out and took the box from his hands. She opened it, and when her eyes landed on the photo, her breath caught. Her fingers traced the carved wood, then the edge of the photo. "I remember this day," she whispered. "We went to the lake after. Mom made those awful egg sandwiches." Walter laughed, a sound full of ache and love. She always added too much mustard. Lena smiled then, just a little. "I missed you," Walter said, voice trembling. "Every day, but I didn't know how to fix what I broke. I thought maybe giving you space was the only thing I could offer." Lena looked at him, really looked, and for the first time since she'd walked in, something in her eyes softened. "I didn't need space," she said. "I needed you to try." Walter's face fell. "I know. I was afraid." They sat down across from each other, still holding the box between them like a shared memory. For a long time they didn't talk about the pain or the years or the letters unsent. They just sat, together. When Emma finally glanced over, she saw them both leaning forward, heads slightly bowed, speaking in low voices. Walter's hand was on the table. Lena's rested beside it, not touching yet, but close. And that closeness, it meant everything. The next morning, Walter wasn't alone. He walked into the cafe at his usual time, wearing his usual coat, but this time someone walked beside him. Lena. Her steps were careful, uncertain, but there was no mistaking the quiet bond that had begun to form again. Emma watched from her corner as the pair entered and took their seats. At their table, the one by the window, the one where silence had once lived. Walter caught Emma's eye and smiled, then motioned for her to join them. She approached, heart full. "Emma," Walter said, his voice softer than usual, but filled with something solid, gratitude, maybe even joy. "This is my daughter Lena." Lena stood and extended her hand. "I've heard a lot about you." Emma shook her hand, sensing how much weight that small moment carried. "It's so good to meet you," she said, and she meant it. They sat together that morning, all three of them, sipping coffee as the cafe stirred with the usual morning hum. For a while, it felt almost ordinary. But for Walter, nothing about it was. This wasn't just coffee. This was what he'd thought he had lost forever. Over the next weeks, the new rhythm took hold. Lena began stopping by more often. Sometimes she brought her daughter, a quiet girl with bright eyes and a fascination with Walter's stories. They'd sit at the window table and listen as he talked about the time he fell off a roof while chasing a squirrel, or how Marianne once tried to bake a pie and accidentally set off the smoke alarm. Emma still came too. Sometimes she joined them, sometimes she just waved and found her usual spot. But whenever Walter looked over, she was there. One afternoon, as the cafe emptied and the light softened, Walter leaned over to Emma. "You know," he said, "for a long time, I thought the world had forgotten about me. I thought maybe that was just how it ended." Emma looked at him, eyes warm. "But then someone sat down and said hello." Walter smiled. "You gave me more than conversation, Emma. You gave me back my family." Emma didn't know what to say, so she just reached out and squeezed his hand. Sometimes words aren't needed when hearts understand. As the months passed, their corner of the cafe transformed. It became more than just a place to drink coffee. It became a gathering spot, a small world of second chances and new beginnings. Customers began to notice. Some even asked to join now and then. And Walter? He no longer looked out the window waiting for something. He was too busy living in the present. On one particularly sunny morning, Emma arrived to find Walter already deep in conversation with a teenage boy about woodworking. Lena was beside him, reading a book. The cafe buzzed around them. Walter looked up, smiled, and waved her over. The table had grown. The silence that once defined it had long since been replaced by laughter, stories, and the quiet, powerful joy of being seen. And somewhere, in that warm, well-worn corner of the cafe, an old man who once sat alone now belonged again. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy meaningful stories like this, we'd love to have you as a subscriber.